Okay, so as Ranga talked about, we've got these three primary use cases that we're talking about for Activate that we're really looking to scale into the marketplace with our customers, prospects, and partners. The first one is around file storage optimization. So this is really kind of getting a handle and visualizing information based on the metadata that we can gather about the files across an enterprise. And obviously what we're trying to do here is to get into a point where we can optimize for volume, for performance, for availability, and for risk. And all of those things ultimately have a big impact on cost of storage, cost of primary storage, and secondary storage in the environments. The second use case that we have is around sensitive data governance. So this is an offering that we created to respond to some of the GDPR legislation that came in last year. And obviously we've got a whole load of other regulations that are based on the similar frameworks that are going throughout the world at the moment. But it's really important that organizations have an opportunity to take a look at their environments and figure out where this information exists. And by experience, I used to manage data breach incidents and wish we had tools like this when I was a lad quite a while ago. But obviously what you need to be able to do is to figure out where it is, to be able to proactively clean it up before it becomes a problem, right? But also to be able to deal with the after effects of either a data breach and being able to figure out what your exposure might have been, or to even deal with these subject access requests where people could call in and say, don't like you, I want you to get rid of all my personal data, right? The third offering that we have there is around compliance search and eDiscovery. And this is around more of a traditional approach of assembling key information from emails and files and so on to prepare for the kind of information that supports, you know, legal matters, investigations, Freedom of Information Act requests, and so on, right? And of course, we take a look at gathering that information from a wide variety of different data sources that you can see at the bottom. So I thought it might be kind of interesting because we talk about these things often as three separate use cases, but in reality, they're really not, right? And so as we took a look at our experience from announcing our GA last year to the experience that we gained in the marketplace, and what we found was that customers really needed to be able to solve immediate problems or immediate initiatives very, very quickly without a lot of additional overhead, right? And so that was the idea, I think, behind unbundling these use cases in our new licensing scheme. So it was an interesting question before about simplifying, you know, and how we moved from effectively one SKU to multiple SKUs. Simplifying is a very relative situation based on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And I think if we had one SKU that was trying to solve all of these problems, that actually makes it simple from a SKU perspective, but it doesn't make it easy from a buying perspective and simple from a buying perspective. So we learned a lot. So Activate is not just something that comes with Commvault Complete. It's actually a standalone offering as well as a complementary offering to Complete. And I'm just kind of going to walk through what we mean by that. So the first thing is that we have the live data, the primary data sources that we're talking about for things like email, for things like file stores, collaboration suites, databases, and so on. And so we make those things available to Activate as a platform. And often what we're seeing is customers are really interested first at taking a look at file storage optimization, because generally they can get in and conceptualize, hey, I either have got the potential to create a lot of savings by identifying areas that I could reduce in my volumes, or they've got an idea of, hey, we don't have a data protection strategy for everything in our environment. Let's take a look and see if there are opportunities to put a more robust data management and protection strategy in based on the stuff that we're currently not managing, right? So this actually, for us, drives a lot of discussion around discovering these new silos that should actually have some sort of backup function associated with it. But one of the things that we also find is that when people are moving to the cloud, moving between clouds, moving some stuff back on premise. They really want to be able to shape what that looks like. And as I said before, maybe reduce some of the data volume before those projects go through. It can save them a lot of time and money. And having been through a couple of those projects, one of the things that I found, I also worked for a university, and one of the big projects we had was to move a lot of our departmental file servers to enterprise file sync and share services, right? So we did that. And as a university, there's an awful lot of data that is unknown, right? So 3 months after moving all this data across, we found significant silos of personal health data, right? We did not have an SLA or a business associates agreement that covers the HIPAA compliance requirement for the US. So all of a sudden, we had this very, very sensitive data moved into an environment that we had no idea about, and we had to really scramble to kind of pull that back again. So what we see here is as people are starting to go through those projects, they actually start taking a look and bleeding into other use cases. And we're finding customers that are starting to take a look at things like file storage optimization, realize that they actually really need to go through this data profiling to really see what's inside that information to make some of those decisions. And of course, that bleeds over to the eDiscovery side. So, hey, I've got a data breach. That by its nature is going to be something where there's going to be a lot of legal action. I worked on 11 incidents, and there was a huge amount of litigation and investigation and public records requirements for that. So all of these things actually do have a relationship, even though customers will often kind of go in and take a look at one specific problem to fix at a time. They evolve. And what we see is people starting off with a particular use case and actually evolving as they gain confidence in the products. So what I thought I'd do is to go through some demos. And
so before you go through the demos, I'm still struggling with this licensing thing. Sounds like what you're saying is that we created a hammer. We discovered that there's 3 different use cases for the hammer. So we're going to charge 3 different costs for the hammer. The product does a core thing, which is it can index data, tag that data, and now you can do interesting things with that data. 3 different specific use cases. So therefore, I have 3 different buyers for the product or 1 big buyer. Still sounds like you guys took a hammer and are just selling it to 3 different people.
Actually, I'd kind of turn that round a little bit, right? We have a platform that does way more than this, right? But what we found was the needs of the customer, what they actually needed to accomplish. They didn't need the rest of the stuff, right, that they were getting charged for. And so we had a number of folks that were involved in these migration projects. I want to move the stuff to the cloud. They didn't want to worry about eDiscovery. So for them, loading up the product cost with eDiscovery as a component of that, it wasn't a value add to them. Right? So there's one way of looking at the product and saying, hey, we've got a big hammer and we could do a whole bunch of things. That's one way of approaching it. We've got customers that are actually desperate to solve these business problems, and they don't want a lot of bloat in functions that they may not want to use as they start off. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's an airline that has that model.
Yeah.
So they're pricing the hammer based on what nail you hit.
Yes.
So, and just to give you a little bit of background here, and this is something that is really quite interesting, is the Activate platform itself does a hell of a lot more than what you're seeing here. Inside Commvault, we actually have built our whole product management and engineering process and our bug request systems using Activate tools. We do all of our legal processing where we have an app called CV Legal, and that's actually using a primary storage use case to do workflows and repository management around all of our legal documents. We use Activate to power our books online, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that we want to be able to get to. These are the use cases that we want to really scale as we start building out the product plans for the other nails, if you like. And we've also got a lot of other customers really right now, particularly in the public sector space, that are taking a look at this combination of backup data and live data. And we've got storage admins that don't realize they're sitting on top of the biggest data lake their company will ever have. They don't know about it, and it's a secret to the rest of their organization. So we're actually talking to a number of prospects at the moment that are really looking to use all of this information that's managed inside of Commvault or defined to Commvault as the potential for a lot of the big data machine learning type initiatives that they have scheduled, right? So those are sort of edge use cases for us at the moment. These are the ones that we really kind of want to get out the door because it's a great demonstrator for the kind of technology that we can apply in a customer situation. Yeah. So what we did was, so I'm going to show you effectively a preview of some of the stuff that we've got coming up in our Service Pack 18. And there's a few different themes that are kind of worth noting. One is for our file storage optimization. We've actually created a whole load of these different charts with analytics. You see as you sort of go through here, you can select different views of the data. And you can start filtering on various aspects of it to redraw the screen and effectively get to the specific sort of views of the data that you're actually kind of looking for, right? So talking about size distribution, tree size, where people are actually trying to take a look at cleaning up their data based on, how big the directories are, for example. We're taking a look at things like looking at data sprawl. One of the big problems that we had in my organization in the university was we had one document that was replicated over 260 times across the organization, and that was just electronic. There was also a lot of paper. So this whole issue of
deduplication.
Say again?
Thank God for dedupe.
Well, but dedupe is great because that helps us with economizing on secondary storage.
Not your primary storage.
But you've got, we had 300 departments, all that had various copies of these things. Nobody knew where the reference copy was and so on. And the more copies you've got of this stuff out in the field, the greater risk that you've got in losing that data, completely losing control, right? So this is a really important issue that's core to data governance, right? So we've got ways to be able to go through and take a look at that data. We've also introduced over the last year entitlement management. So this is where we actually get to start taking a look at locking down information based on, the movement of staff. We have a lot of situations, and it's an alarming level of organizations that all of a sudden find that they have large lists of things like social security numbers, credit cards, national health numbers in locations that are open to everybody in the organization. Right? So this is a way here where we've got the ability to kind of go through and start actually doing analysis based on, who's leaving the organization, who's moving, what resources do they have access to.
So with these, this is the file storage optimization tool, but you're also providing some information about the sensitivity of the information as well?
We can. In fact,
even though you don't have the sensitive data.
So you would license those components to get those additional views, right?
Okay.
A lot of people are not worried about it, but when you switch that piece of it on, then you start enabling things like the entity analysis, the profiling, right? And we can leverage those across the use cases.
I got you.
So I see orphan files up there. Do you have read-write access into those files within the application to move those files and do anything with them? Or are you just able to see what they are and where they are?
So right now in the upcoming release, we're providing the visibility into it, but all of that remediation is coming up on the roadmap. Okay. We do provide the remediation right now if they contain sensitive data.
Okay.
And I'll walk through a couple of examples of that.
So, hold on, so if the file contains sensitive data, you're able to do remediation. How are you able to tell if the file contains sensitive data?
That will be on the screen shortly.
Okay.
So there's a couple of other things I just wanted to show you. So one of the things that we can do here, obviously, is to be able to search across different silos. So here's an example where we've actually just created a file search so that you can actually start taking a look at information from multiple data sources, right? You can also do the searches, and you'll see here that we've actually started opening up. Again, if you've got the sensitive data governance stuff installed, we now start enabling all of the tagging there for hey, I want to be able to find where we're, pull up the files that just have somebody's email address in them and that sort of thing, right? We do a lot of work with previews so people can kind of verify what they're dealing with. And again, with the previews, you can see if there's any sensitive data there, if they have that part of it licensed, right?
This data profiling that you're doing as part of the sensitive, is that something you developed in-house or acquired?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I'll go through that.
Okay.
So the entitlement management thing, so this is where we're kind of looking to lock down access. So in this case, we're actually trying to take a look and say, right, well, let's take a look and see if we can go through here. I'm going to take a look at who currently has access. I can see that there's an example there where that is open to everybody. And I can actually just go in and change the access controls directly from this panel. I can review all of that stuff, and I can apply the permission changes directly from there. And as we do those changes, there's a log in there so that you can actually go back and restore to those points as well. So one of the things that we found a lot was as people were starting to go through this and figuring out what was what they were trying to accomplish with locking down the data. Some of it was based on locking down sensitive data. Some of it was locking down critical data. Like if that data wasn't there, what would happen to the business, right? But one of the big problems with critical data is if I've got unauthorized, well, it may be authorized, but it may not be desirable that a critical piece of data has right access to everybody in marketing, because nobody can trust marketing, right?
Ever.
We won't tell them that you said that.
Now this means that your process is running with all the rights, full admin, because
Actually,
you need to go into
good
the
point.
file.
So what we do as a general rule for all of this stuff is that when you define these things, you're inheriting the access rights from the location. So if you've got a user that's going into this app, they can only see what they would have access to, right? So if I've got a guy who's the marketing admin, he would only be able to see the marketing files and make changes to the marketing files.
Okay,
So-
but one day when you launch the software, you need to get into that file. So you got to be the admin to see all the content of all the files. At one moment in time, when you are
Yeah, I
reading
mean,
that file.
and you often you will find that in terms of separation of duties, but there's often super users that are allocated, and their actions are usually highly monitored for what they can do. And so you start taking a look at the difference between folks that are doing like initial setup and then the folks that have delegated responsibilities in those departments to do the things on their data. And this is actually one of the really good features particularly about things like sensitive data, where you don't want the IT guy, for example, to be making decisions on the marketing data without the marketing guy's response, right? So we've got an answer to that as well.
How does that work, Patrick, with basic search? So imagine I've got access to your tool.
Yeah.
And I go digging around and I find sensitive data, or I find personal data that shouldn't be on there. That would be technically illegal or something like that. And I use that knowledge to go off and blackmail somebody, or use that outside of the company.
Yeah.
I get into the company for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I get access to the tool. I find you've got something that might be worth hacking for, and then I come in and hack your company to get the data. Are you auditing the search that people are doing in order to make sure you can see that?
Yeah, so all of that stuff is kept in our audit logs.
Right, and so you not anything to do with modifying the data, but purely just running searches.
Yep.
Okay.
Because we're also, in general, sort of moving more to a point, frankly, where we want to be taking a look at search optimization as well. So we want to figure out what people are searching for, what kind of stuff are they selecting. And for example, with our books online as the example, The relevancy there is based on what people are most frequently selecting. So that's a signal that comes back into the process. So, yeah.
So roles are on the fly, or are they predetermined?
Roles?
No.
Well, roles are inherited from whatever would be. I mean, we've got specific roles that are set up for the apps themselves, but in terms of being able to take a look at the data, those things are inherited from whatever the source system is. So, for example, I would not be able to go through and do a complete search of everybody's email for an eDiscovery type thing unless I had those elevated privileges. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It kind of sounded like you could make like thousands of different possible user roles.
Yeah, there could be, but again, because we actually inherit we inherit those roles from whatever the source system is. It's not like, it's the same sort of thing with backup recovery, right? You wouldn't allow somebody to recover a file that they, didn't have access to, right? Yeah.
Role overlap, most restrictive, most accessible. So I'm a user, and I'm given one role in one department and a different role in a different department, and this role over here gives me access to a lot more.
Yeah.
And this role over here severely curtails my access. Which one wins?
Well, they're relative to the content, right?
Let's say there's overlap.
So if there's overlap, well, actually I've got my technical team in the back, but I think, if I have different permissions on my marketing data than I do on my sales data than I do on my financial data, I can't take a look at the stuff in any of those silos based on the access controls that have already been defined for that primary data, right?
Let's say I do work for marketing and I do work for finance. You all have, both have a base layer, and then finance has a couple more, okay? But I do work for both, right? I would need to access stuff that's higher level in finance, but my marketing role, which also
yeah, I
deals
mean,
with that.
if you've got something that's a higher designation, and just nod, guys, the higher designation overrides the more
most
restrictive designation.
Most permissive designation.
Yeah, I mean, if they're in a group that has like admin rights on a folder for finance, and there's another rule that says that they have a different set of
Read only, or, yeah.
So they'll get the admin access.
Okay, interesting.
So here you can see what happens when we start setting up the sensitive data analysis. So this is where we get to the point where we're creating these, what we call projects. And I've got a couple of projects set up, but this kind of gives you an idea of the types of data sources that we can take a look at and profile. Anything from file systems, email with Gmail as well, the Google Drives, OneDrive, SharePoints, as well as database. And the database stuff is actually quite new. We've actually got limitations on that in terms of checking, for example, the first 50 rows to be able to provide some indicators there. But if you were to go in to take a look at one of those projects, I could see that this one project, which has got a specific classification plan that we're looking at, will show, hey, these are the these are the data sources that are appropriate to that particular project. I can see what my entities are that have been found, the top ones. I can see if there's a set of risks that's been identified, and so on. And I could actually start going in to take a look in detail about what's happening. And again, using the filtering, I could figure out ownership information. I could take a look at things like sensitivity scores. So is there information there that has a higher chance of having really condensed, like lists of social security numbers, credit cards, national health numbers, and so on? And I can kind of go through and just start taking a look at, all right, well, is most of this stuff old data? Could I just get rid of it, right? So there's a whole bunch of things that we can see here in terms of risks that we really provide people with the ability then to go down and take a look at the first actions first, right? So one of the challenges that a lot of organizations have when they start running these things is they get absolutely overwhelmed with the amount of data that has personal data. Almost every organization, every department within an organization is going to have some kind of personal data in it. And it's usually a real shock to the system when people see what that is. So we've also got kind of alternate views where we can take a look at file lists and so on, do different types of filtering. We could go through and take a look at different document previews and so on. Finding the information that's in there, right? If I were to take a look and say at that point, you know, I want to remediate that, right? There's a bunch of things that we can do. We can delete that information, and here you can see we've got some options here to delete a certain number of files. I can optionally delete that stuff from backups. And I can create review requests. So this is where we actually get the workflow between the IT guy maybe that's found the problem and the guy in the department that actually has to make the decisions. This is a really critical information governance issue, right? So we set up a review and approval workflow. And once the approval's been done, the actions for something like a delete will actually take place. Similarly, we see that there's a desire to do things like quarantining. So if I'm finding files that are in there, I can move those to a location where there's a lot more scrutiny and access control over the top of it. I could decide to archive that information to get it again into a different location with different data policies associated with it. Or I could even set retentions on it so that we could create archiving policies later on, or take a look at a remediation view where I could actually just say, hey, if this stuff has expired after 30 days, nobody's done anything with it, I'm just going to go ahead and delete those files, right? So this is a way where we can see on the screen here that you can go through and effectively, proactively clean up that data. Another thing that we're actually introducing as part of SP18 is the ability to create redactions, right? So I could sort of say here, if I'm adding a request to do an export, so I've got like a right to access or a right for disclosure, I could mark out the fact that, hey, when I want to export these documents, I can actually black out the offending data, right? And so we'd go through, we'd create a request, and when that comes up in my review and I get a chance to do the review and approval, I could say, right, well, I want to enable the redaction for that, and I could switch it off if I wanted to uncover that. But that effectively gives me a chance then to pull that into my export list, and when the PDF's created, there is a completely redacted document for that data, right? So it's another kind of good thing there. On the eDiscovery side, one of the things that you're also going to see is more and more of our functionality is getting moved into the command center with updated user experience. So if we were to take a look at our old user experience for that, here's an example of what we've got in terms of being able to search for files. And you can see here that we've got multiple data sources. We can go through and take a look at adding and exporting this kind of information, doing advanced searching, effectively collecting this information so that it could be used for passing across to a third-party system later on, or sending out to legal counsel for review and that sort of thing. So I think just the last thing that I'll show you there is what that would then look like in terms of the command center, where we're actually pulling it in with a new user experience. It's a lot easier to use. We've also got some of those tags in place for the sensitive data, should that be needed. So all these demos are available in excruciating detail on the show floor. If there's any particular areas that interest you, be happy to talk.